The shovel struck something hard in the dry Texas earth, and Sienna Ashford froze like a rabbit sensing a coyote, her breath catching in her throat as she heard the unmistakable crunch of boots on gravel behind the barn. It was past midnight in San Antonio, Texas, in the summer of 1878, and no decent person had any business being awake at this hour, much less digging holes in someone else's property. She turned slowly, her fingers still wrapped around the wooden handle, her heart hammering against her ribs as a tall figure emerged from the shadows cast by the quarter moon. The man wore a dusty Stetson pulled low over his eyes, and even in the darkness, she could make out the broad shoulders and lean build of someone who spent his days working cattle. He stopped about 10 feet away, his hands hanging loose at his sides in a way that suggested he was accustomed to violence, but was not currently seeking it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the silence broken only by the distant howl of a coyote and the restless stamping of horses in the barn. "You digging up treasure or burying bodies?" The man's voice was low and rough, like whiskey poured over gravel, but there was a hint of amusement in it that made Sienna's shoulders drop slightly from their defensive hunch. "Neither," she whispered, glancing nervously toward the main house where her employer slept. "Please, you have to go. If Mr. Caldwell wakes up and finds anyone out here, he will take his rifle to both of us." The cowboy took a step closer, and the moonlight caught his face properly for the first time. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with a strong jaw darkened by several days of stubble and eyes that seemed to hold equal measures of curiosity and kindness. She had seen him around the ranch before, one of the hands Caldwell had hired for the summer drive, but they had never spoken directly. "Ivan Jameson," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I am supposed to be checking the horses, heard digging, figured I should investigate." His gaze dropped to the shallow hole at her feet, where 3 silver spoons gleamed dully in the dirt. "Those do not look like they belong to you." Sienna's chin lifted defensively, and she tightened her grip on the shovel. "They were my mother's." "Mr. Caldwell has no right to them, but he will not see it that way. I am saving what I can before I leave this place." "You are planning to run?" Ivan asked, his tone carefully neutral. "I am planning to leave," Sienna corrected. "There is a difference. I have been working for the Caldwells for 3 years, ever since my parents died of fever. Mrs. Caldwell promised I could work off their debts and go free, but the debts never seem to shrink, no matter how many floors I scrub or meals I cook. Last week, I overheard Mr. Caldwell telling his brother he plans to marry me off to some rancher twice my age who will pay him handsomely for a young wife. She was 20 years old enough to know her own mind and young enough to believe she could still control her fate. Ivan was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he knelt beside the hole and began pushing the dirt back over the spoons with his bare hands. "How much have you saved? Excuse me." Sienna blinked at him, confused by his sudden cooperation. "How much money or valuables have you managed to hide?" Ivan looked up at her, his dark eyes serious. "If you are going to make a run for it, you will need enough to get you somewhere safe and keep you fed until you can find honest work. Running with empty pockets is just another way of dying." Sienna hesitated, every instinct warning her not to trust this stranger, but something in his straightforward manner made her want to be honest. "I have been taking things little by little for 6 months. Small things Mrs. Caldwell will not notice right away. A few spoons, some old coins from the bottom of a drawer, a silver hair comb. I have it all hidden in different spots around the property. I figure I have maybe $50 worth, perhaps more if I can sell it right." Ivan whistled low. "That is not bad, but it is not enough." Not if you are planning to start fresh somewhere far enough away that Caldwell cannot drag you back. He stood up and dusted off his hands on his worn denim pants. I will help you. Why would you do that? Sienna demanded, suspicion flooding back. You do not even know me. What do you want in return? The cowboy's expression hardened slightly. I do not want anything except to see someone get free of a bad situation. My sister was in service to a family in Missouri. They worked her half to death and paid her nothing, told her she owed them for room and board. By the time I found out where she was and came to get her, she was sick with consumption. She died 2 months later. His voice was steady, but Sienna could hear the old grief underneath it. She was only 17. So when I see someone else trying to escape the same kind of trap, I help if I can. No strings attached. Sienna felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them away fiercely. She could not afford to be emotional, not now. I am sorry about your sister. Me too, Ivan said simply. He glanced toward the main house, then back at her. Go on back inside before someone notices you are gone. Tomorrow night, same time, meet me here and show me where you have hidden everything. We will figure out the best way to get you out of here. Sienna wanted to argue, to insist she could manage on her own, but the truth was she had been terrified about the actual mechanics of escape. She nodded once, quickly, then gathered her shovel and hurried back toward the small room off the kitchen where she slept. Behind her, she heard Ivan's boots crunching away toward the horse barn, and she wondered if she had just made the best decision of her life or the most foolish. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sienna went through her usual routine of cooking breakfast, cleaning the house, helping Mrs. Caldwell with her correspondence, and preparing the evening meal, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept catching herself staring out windows toward the fields where Ivan and the other cowboys were working, trying to spot his tall form among them. What if he had changed his mind? What if he had decided it was too risky to get involved? What if he told Mr. Caldwell what she was planning? That last thought made her stomach churn with fear, but when she served dinner that evening and Mr. Caldwell barely glanced at her beyond grunting his approval of the roasted chicken, she began to relax slightly. If Ivan had told him anything, she would already be locked in the cellar or worse. Sienna, I will need you to press my blue dress tomorrow, Mrs. Caldwell said as Sienna cleared the plates. We are having guests for dinner and I want everything to be perfect. Yes, madam, Sienna murmured, keeping her eyes downcast. Mr. Barlow will be among them, Mr. Caldwell added, shooting his wife a meaningful look. Fine man. Owns 3,000 acres up north. Widower, looking for a new wife. Sienna's hands tightened on the stack of plates she was carrying, but she forced herself to remain calm. Will there be anything else? No, get out of my sight, Caldwell said dismissively. Already turning his attention back to his wife, Sienna retreated to the kitchen, her heart pounding. So it was Barlow they planned to sell her to. She had seen the man once before, a heavy-set figure in his late 40s with cold eyes and a reputation for cruelty to his workers. The thought of being tied to him for the rest of her life made her skin crawl. She had to get away, and soon. The hours until midnight felt like days, but finally the house fell silent. Sienna slipped out of her room, still wearing her simple cotton dress but with her sturdiest boots on her feet. She had a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the night chill, and her hands were shaking slightly as she made her way to the barn. Ivan was already there, leaning against the barn wall with his arms crossed. He straightened when he saw her, and Sienna noticed he had brought a canvas sack with him. "Ready?" he asked quietly. She nodded, and for the next hour they moved silently through the property as she showed him each hiding spot. The spoons behind the barn. A small leather pouch of coins buried near the chicken coop. The silver hair comb wrapped in cloth and tucked into a hollow log by the creek. An old pocket watch she had found in the attic and hidden in the hay loft. With each item, Ivan carefully placed it in the sack, his expression growing more impressed. "You are thorough," he said approvingly as they finished collecting the last item, a delicate silver locket that had belonged to Sienna's mother. "This is good. This will give you a real start." "Thank you for helping me," Sienna said softly, clutching the locket for a moment before handing it over. "I do not know why you are taking this risk, but I am grateful." Ivan looked at her in the moonlight, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "I told you why," he said. "But I suppose there is more to it than just my sister's memory. I have been watching you these past few weeks since I started working here. You are not like the other women I have known. You have spirit. You keep your head up even when Caldwell treats you like dirt. You deserve better than what this place has to offer." Sienna felt heat rise in her cheeks and was grateful for the darkness that hid her blush. "When should I go?" she asked, changing the subject. "I was thinking perhaps next week after the guests leave." "No," Ivan said firmly. "You need to go tomorrow night. Caldwell is planning to announce your engagement to Barlow at that dinner. Once that happens, it will be 10 times harder to escape. He will be watching you like a hawk." "Tomorrow?" Sienna's voice rose in panic. "I cannot possibly be ready by tomorrow. I need to prepare, to plan a route, to figure out where I am even going." "I have been thinking about that," Ivan said. He set the sack down and took off his hat, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture that suggested he was about to say something he was not entirely sure about. "There is a stage that leaves San Antonio every Wednesday morning, heading west to El Paso. From there, you can catch a train to California or up to Colorado. Both places have plenty of work for women with skills like yours. But the stage costs money, and you will need funds to live on once you get there." "I know," Sienna said miserably. "Even if I sell everything I have hidden, it will barely be enough for the stage ticket and maybe a week or two of room and board. I will have to find work immediately, and if I cannot, I will end up in the same situation I am in now, just in a different city." Ivan replaced his hat and looked at her steadily. "What if you did not have to go alone?" Sienna stared at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean I have some money saved," Ivan said. "Not a fortune, but enough to make a difference. And I am a good worker. I can find employment anywhere there are cattle or horses, which is to say anywhere in the West. If we traveled together, pooled our resources, we would both have a better chance of making it. You want to come with me?" Sienna could hardly believe what she was hearing. "But you do not even know me. Why would you give up your job here and take such a risk for a stranger?" Ivan stepped closer, and in the moonlight, his eyes were very dark and very serious. "Maybe I am tired of drifting from ranch to ranch with nothing to show for it but sore muscles and dust in my lungs. Maybe I am ready to put down roots somewhere, build something that is mine. And maybe I think you are worth taking a risk for." He paused, then added more softly, "Or maybe I just do not want to see you go and spend the rest of my life wondering if you made it safely." Sienna's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. In the 3 weeks since Ivan had started working at the ranch, she had noticed him too, though she had been careful not to show it. She had noticed the way he always tipped his hat to her when they passed in the yard, the way he defended one of the younger ranch hands from Caldwell's verbal abuse, the way he sat apart from the other cowboys during meals, reading a battered book by lamplight. She had thought him handsome, certainly, but more than that, she had thought him decent, a quality in short supply in her world. "If we traveled together, people would talk," she said, trying to be practical even as her heart was urging her to say yes. "They would assume we were married, or that I was some kind of fallen woman." "Then we tell people we are married," Ivan said. We could even make it legal once we get to El Paso if you want, or we could just be traveling companions, business partners. I will leave that up to you. All I know is that I am offering you a way out that does not involve you facing the world alone, and I am asking for a chance to see if maybe there could be something between us worth building a life around." Sienna looked at this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not even known she was praying. It was mad, completely mad, to even consider running off with someone she barely knew. But staying here meant becoming Mr. Barlow's wife, and that was a fate worse than any risk she could imagine. "All right," she whispered. "All right, I will do it. We will leave tomorrow night." Ivan's whole face transformed with a smile that made him look younger and more carefree. "You will not regret this, I promise. We will make a good life, Sienna. A real life where you answer to no one but yourself." They made their plans quickly and quietly. Ivan would purchase the stage tickets in town the next morning, telling anyone who asked that he was leaving Caldwell's employ to take a job further west. Sienna would pack only what she could carry in a small bag, nothing that would be noticed as missing until after they were gone. They would meet at the edge of the property at 3 in the morning, well before dawn, and make their way into San Antonio to catch the 6 o'clock stage. The next day was the longest of Sienna's life. She pressed Mrs. Caldwell's blue dress, polished the silver for dinner, and prepared an elaborate meal of beef roast with potatoes and carrots, all while her insides churned with a mixture of terror and excitement. Every time Mr. Caldwell looked at her, she was certain he could read her intentions on her face, but he barely acknowledged her presence beyond complaining that the carrots were overcooked. During dinner, Mr. Barlow arrived, just as large and unpleasant as she remembered. He stared at Sienna throughout the meal with an expression that made her skin crawl, commenting to Caldwell that she looked sturdy enough for breeding, as if she were a mare being considered for purchase. Sienna kept her eyes on her work and her expression neutral, but inside she was counting down the hours until freedom. When she finally retired to her room after cleaning up from dinner, she allowed herself to pack a small carpet bag with her few possessions. 2 changes of clothes, her mother's Bible, a daguerreotype of her parents, and the little bit of money she had managed to save before she started hiding valuables around the property. She changed into her traveling dress, a simple brown cotton that would not show dust, and lay down on her bed fully clothed to wait for the hours to pass. She must have dozed off because she woke with a start to the sound of something tapping at her window. Her heart leaping into her throat, she stumbled to the window and found Ivan crouched outside, gesturing for her to hurry. She grabbed her bag, took one last look around the tiny room that had been her prison for 3 years, and climbed out the window into the night. Ivan took her bag in her hand, and they ran together across the dark property, not stopping until they were well past the boundary fence and onto the open road. Only then did they slow to a fast walk, both of them breathing hard and occasionally looking back over their shoulders to make sure no one was following. "Are you all right?" Ivan asked, his hand still wrapped around hers. "I think so," Sienna said, and then she started to laugh, a slightly hysterical sound that she quickly muffled with her free hand. "I cannot believe we actually did it. I cannot believe I am free." "Not free yet," Ivan cautioned, but he was grinning too. "We still have to make it to the stage and out of Texas. Caldwell will come after you when he realizes you are gone, and he has friends all over San Antonio." They walked quickly through the pre-dawn darkness, and Sienna found comfort in the solid warmth of Ivan's hand around hers. When they finally reached the outskirts of San Antonio, the sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, painting the horizon in shades of pink and gold. The stage office was a small building near the center of town, and already a few other passengers were gathering, loading bags and saying goodbyes. Ivan went inside to confirm their tickets while Sienna waited in the shadows, her heart pounding every time she saw a man on horseback or heard raised voices. What if Caldwell had already discovered her absence? What if he had sent men into town to look for her? She pulled her shawl up over her head, trying to make herself as inconspicuous as possible. When Ivan emerged, he had 2 tickets in his hand and a worried expression on his face. "The stage is delayed," he said quietly. "Something about a broken wheel that needs replacing. It will not leave until noon." Noon. Sienna felt panic rising in her chest. "But that gives Caldwell hours to find us. We need to leave now." "I know," Ivan said grimly, "but there is no other stage until next week, and the trains do not run from San Antonio. We could try to buy horses, but that would cost more than we can afford, and riding across open country would make us even more visible." He thought for a moment, then said, "There is a church a few streets over. We could wait there." Even if Caldwell comes looking, he would not think to search a church, and it would give us a safe place to stay out of sight. They made their way to the small Catholic church, its white adobe walls gleaming in the early morning sun. Inside, it was cool and dim, lit only by candles flickering before a statue of the Virgin Mary. An elderly priest was sweeping the floor, and he looked up in surprise when they entered. "Good morning, children," he said in a heavily accented voice. "You are here very early for Mass." "We are traveling, Father," Ivan said respectfully. "Our stage has been delayed, and we were hoping we might wait here rather than on the street. We do not wish to cause any trouble." The priest studied them for a moment, his wise old eyes taking in their dusty clothes and the way Sienna kept glancing nervously toward the door. "You are running from something," he observed, and it was not a question. Sienna opened her mouth to deny it, but Ivan squeezed her hand gently and said, "Running toward something, Father. Toward a better life, we hope. But yes, there are those who would prefer we stayed where we were." The priest nodded slowly. "I see. And are your intentions honorable toward this young woman?" "Yes, Father," Ivan said firmly. "I intend to marry her if she will have me, and to provide for her to the best of my ability." "Then you are welcome to wait here," the priest said. "There is a small room behind the sacristy where you can rest unseen. I will call you when it is time for your stage." "Thank you, Father," Sienna said, her voice thick with relief and gratitude. "Thank you so much." The priest led them to a tiny room containing nothing but a wooden bench and a small table with a Bible on it. "I will bring you some bread and water," he said. "Try to rest. God watches over those who seek a righteous path." After he left, Sienna sank onto the bench and covered her face with her hands. The terror and exhaustion of the past 24 hours were catching up with her, and she felt dangerously close to tears. Ivan sat beside her and carefully put his arm around her shoulders. "We are going to make it," he said softly. "Just a few more hours and we will be on that stage heading west. Caldwell will not find us here." "You said you would marry me," Sienna said, her voice muffled by her hands. "Did you mean that, or were you just telling the priest what he wanted to hear?" Ivan was quiet for a moment, and when Sienna finally looked up at him, his expression was serious but open. "I meant it," he said. "I know we barely know each other, and I know this is all happening too fast, but I meant every word. If you want to marry me, truly marry me, I would be honored. And if you would rather we just travel as friends until you know me better, I respect that too. Either way, I am with you until you tell me to leave." Sienna looked into his dark eyes and saw only sincerity there. This man had risked his job, his safety, and possibly his life to help her escape. He had offered her his protection and his resources without asking for anything in return. And more than that, when she looked at him, She felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. "Ask me again when we get to El Paso," she said finally. "When we are truly safe and away from here. Ask me again and I will give you my answer." Ivan smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "That is a deal." The priest returned with bread, cheese, and water, and they ate gratefully, neither of them having had a proper meal since the day before. Afterward, exhaustion overtook them both, and they dozed fitfully on the hard bench, Sienna's head resting on Ivan's shoulder and his arm around her waist. It felt natural and right, as if they had been sitting this way for years rather than hours. They were jolted awake by the sound of raised voices in the church. Sienna's eyes flew open, and she and Ivan both froze, listening intently. Mr. Caldwell's voice, rough and angry, was unmistakable. "I am telling you, Father, my servant girl ran off in the night and stole valuable property. If you are hiding her, you are aiding a thief." "I am hiding no one," the priest's calm voice responded, "and I would ask you to lower your voice in the house of God." "Do not preach at me, old man," Caldwell snarled. "I have every right to search this building." "You have no such right," the priest said firmly. "Not without the sheriff and not without proof of your accusations. Now I suggest you leave before I am forced to contact the authorities myself about your behavior." There was a long, tense silence. Then Caldwell said, "If I find out you are lying to me, there will be consequences." "The only consequences I fear are those delivered by the Lord," the priest replied. "Good day, Mr. Caldwell." Heavy footsteps stomped toward the door, and they heard it slam shut with enough force to rattle the windows. Sienna realized she was gripping Ivan's hand so tightly her knuckles were white, and she forced herself to relax her fingers. "That was too close," she whispered. "But he is gone," Ivan pointed out, "and he has no proof we are here. The priest protected us." A few moments later, the priest appeared in the doorway of their hiding room. "Your stagecoach will be leaving in 1 hour," he said. "I suggest you stay here until the last possible moment, then go directly to the coach. Mr. Caldwell is searching the town, but he cannot be everywhere at once." "How can we ever thank you?" Sienna asked. The old priest smiled. "Live a good life, be kind to each other. That is thanks enough." He made the sign of the cross over them. "Go with God, children." When the time came, they slipped out of the church and hurried through the back streets to the stage office. Sienna kept her head down and her shawl pulled up, her heart hammering with every person they passed. But luck was with them, and they reached the stage just as the driver was calling for passengers to board. They climbed inside the coach, which was already occupied by a middle-aged woman with 2 young children and an older gentleman in a dusty suit. Sienna took the seat by the window, and Ivan sat protectively beside her, positioning himself between her and the other passengers. The driver cracked his whip, and the horses lurched forward. Sienna watched through the window as San Antonio began to fall away behind them, and only when the town was completely out of sight did she allow herself to believe they had actually escaped. She turned to Ivan, and he was watching her with an expression of such tender concern that it made her chest ache. "We did it," she said softly, hardly daring to believe it. "We did," he agreed, and he took her hand again, threading his fingers through hers. "We are free, Sienna, both of us." The journey to El Paso took 3 days, with stops at way stations for food and rest. The accommodations were rough, the food plain, and the seats in the coach hard enough to leave bruises, but Sienna did not care. Every mile they traveled was a mile further from her old life, and closer to whatever future she and Ivan would build together. During those 3 days, they talked more than Sienna had talked to anyone in years. Ivan told her about growing up in Missouri, the son of a farmer who drank too much and a mother who died when he was 12. He told her about leaving home at 16 to seek his fortune out west, about the various ranches where he had worked, the good bosses and the bad ones, the beautiful country he had seen and the hard lessons he had learned. He told her about his sister, Emily, and how her death had changed something fundamental in him, made him realize that money and success meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. Sienna, in turn, told him about her childhood in a small town outside San Antonio, where her father had been a schoolteacher and her mother a seamstress. She told him about how they had died within days of each other during a fever epidemic, leaving her orphaned at 17 with debts she had no way to pay. She told him about the Caldwells, who had seemed like saviors at first but quickly revealed themselves to be something else entirely. She told him about the long nights when she had lain awake wondering if she would ever be free, and the moment when she decided she would either escape or die trying. "You are the bravest person I have ever met," Ivan said when she finished. "To plan and execute an escape like that, all on your own, knowing the risks, that takes courage. Or desperation," Sienna said with a small smile. "But I am glad I did it. Even if everything falls apart from here, at least I will know I tried." "It will not fall apart," Ivan said with quiet confidence. "We will make sure of it." By the time they reached El Paso, Sienna felt like she knew Ivan better than she had known some people she had spent years with. She knew he preferred coffee to tea, that he had a scar on his shoulder from being thrown by a horse when he was 19, that he could read and write but was embarrassed about his handwriting, that his favorite book was a battered copy of Ivanhoe he had carried with him for nearly a decade. She knew he was kind and thoughtful and had a quiet sense of humor that made her laugh when she least expected it. And she knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that she was falling in love with him. El Paso was a rough town perched on the edge of the Rio Grande, full of miners, cowboys, soldiers, and adventurers passing through on their way to somewhere else. Ivan found them a room in a modest boarding house, run by a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Chen, who made it clear she would tolerate no impropriety under her roof. They took 2 separate rooms, and Sienna appreciated that Ivan did not push for anything else, though she caught him looking at her sometimes with an expression that made her pulse quicken. The next morning, Ivan went to sell the valuables Sienna had collected, while she stayed at the boarding house to rest and clean up properly for the first time in days. When he returned, he had a satisfied look on his face and a small leather pouch in his hand. "We got $75, he announced. "That woman at the mercantile drove a hard bargain, but I think we did well. Combined with what I have saved, we have enough to live on for several months if we are careful, or enough to buy train tickets to California with some left over to get started once we arrive." "California," Sienna said wonderingly. She had heard of it, of course, the land of opportunity and gold, but it had always seemed as far away and mythical as the moon. "Do you really think we could make a life there?" "I think we could make a life anywhere," Ivan said. "But California has good weather, plenty of ranches that need workers, and it is far enough from Texas that Caldwell will never bother to look for us there. Plus, I have heard they are building new towns all the time. A man with a strong back and a woman with good sense could do well for themselves." He sat down across from her at the small table in her room, and his expression turned serious. "But before we make any plans, I need to ask you something. When we were in San Antonio, in the church, I said I would marry you if you would have me. You told me to ask again when we got to El Paso. Well, here we are." He reached across the table and took her hands in his. "Sienna Ashford, I know I am not much. I am just a cowboy with more dust than dollars and no family to speak of. But I promise you this, If you marry me, I will spend every day for the rest of my life trying to make you happy. I will work hard, I will be faithful, and I will never raise my hand to you or speak to you with cruelty. I will respect your mind and your opinions, and I will be your partner in all things. So I am asking, will you marry me? Sienna looked at his earnest face, at the calloused hands holding hers so gently, and felt tears spill down her cheeks. But these were not tears of sadness or fear. These were tears of relief and joy, and the overwhelming realization that she had found something she had thought was lost to her forever, a chance at real love. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking. "Yes, Ivan, I will marry you." His face split into a grin so wide, it looked like it might hurt, and he stood up and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around the small room while she laughed and cried at the same time. When he finally set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, a sweet, gentle kiss that promised everything and demanded nothing. "We should do it properly," he said when they finally pulled apart. "Find a preacher, get a real certificate. I want everything legal and right so no one can ever say you are not my true wife." They were married that afternoon in a small church at the edge of town, with Mrs. Chen and the local blacksmith serving as witnesses. Sienna wore the best dress she had packed, a simple blue cotton that had belonged to her mother, and Ivan had used some of their precious funds to buy a white rose from a street vendor to serve as her bouquet. The preacher was a kind-faced man who seemed genuinely pleased to be marrying two people who were clearly in love, and he gave them a brief sermon about the responsibilities and joys of marriage before pronouncing them husband and wife. When Ivan kissed her this time, as her husband, Sienna felt like her heart might burst from her chest. She was married. She was free. She was beginning a new life with a man she loved and who loved her in return. It seemed impossible that just a week ago she had been burying silver spoons behind a barn, terrified and alone. They spent their wedding night in Ivan's room at the boarding house, and Sienna discovered that her husband was as gentle and considerate in intimacy as he was in everything else. He took his time, making sure she was comfortable and cared for, and when they finally came together as husband and wife, it felt natural and right and like something sacred. Afterward, they lay in the narrow bed with Sienna's head on Ivan's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Are you happy?" he asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Happier than I have ever been," Sienna replied honestly. "I keep thinking I am going to wake up and find this was all a dream." "Not a dream," Ivan assured her. "This is real, we are real. And tomorrow, we are going to buy train tickets to California and start our real life together." They stayed in El Paso for 3 more days while they made arrangements and gathered supplies for the journey. Ivan bought them both sturdy traveling clothes and a large trunk to hold their possessions. Sienna purchased fabric and sewing supplies, thinking she could take in mending or dressmaking work once they settled somewhere. They ate meals at cheap diners and spent their evenings walking along the river, talking about their plans and dreams for the future. "I want to buy land someday," Ivan told her as they watched the sun set over the Rio Grande. "Nothing huge, just enough for a house and maybe some horses. I have been working other people's ranches my whole adult life. I want something that is mine, that I can build with my own hands and pass down to our children someday." "Our children," Sienna repeated softly, testing the words. "I like the sound of that. How many do you want?" Ivan asked, turning to look at her. Sienna thought about it. 3 or 4, I think. Enough that they always have someone to play with, but not so many that I cannot give them each proper attention. And I want them to go to school to learn to read and write well. Education is important." "Agreed," Ivan said. "My father could barely write his own name, and it made his life harder than it needed to be. Any children of ours will have better opportunities. The train journey to California took another 4 days, but it was a more comfortable trip than the stagecoach had been. They had a private compartment where they could talk and rest without strangers listening in, and the train stopped at established stations where they could buy hot meals and stretch their legs. Sienna spent hours watching the landscape change outside the window, from the dry desert of New Mexico to the mountains of Arizona, and finally, to the fertile valleys of California. They decided to settle in Sacramento, a growing city that seemed to offer opportunities for people willing to work hard. Ivan found employment almost immediately at a large ranch outside town, and the owner was happy to provide them with a small cabin on the property as part of his wages. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, but it was theirs, and Sienna set about making it into a home with a fierce determination. She hung curtains she sewed herself, planted a vegetable garden, and put out word in town that she was available for sewing and mending work. Within a month, she had a steady stream of customers, and the extra income helped them save money faster than they had dared hope. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Ivan worked long days at the ranch, coming home tired but satisfied with his labor. Sienna kept the house, tended her garden, and took in enough sewing work to keep herself busy without being overwhelmed. In the evenings, they would sit on their small porch and talk about their day, or Ivan would read aloud from his books while Sienna mended clothes by lamplight. On Sundays, they attended church and then spent the afternoon exploring the area, getting to know their new home. 6 months after they arrived in California, Sienna realized she had not had her monthly courses in some time. She felt different too, tired in the mornings and unusually emotional. When she finally went to see a doctor in town, he confirmed what she had already begun to suspect. She was expecting a child. She told Ivan that evening after dinner, and his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her up in his arms, careful of her belly even though she was barely showing, and spun her around just as he had done the day she agreed to marry him. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "Sienna, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" She asked, suddenly nervous. "I know we said we wanted children, but I did not expect it to happen so soon." "Happy?" Ivan set her down and took her face in his hands, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I am more than happy. I am thrilled, terrified but thrilled. We are going to have a family, Sienna, a real family of our own." The pregnancy was not easy. Sienna suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and as she grew larger, she found it increasingly difficult to do her sewing work. But Ivan was endlessly patient and supportive, taking on extra chores around the house and never complaining when dinner was late or the house was not as tidy as usual. As her delivery date approached, they made preparations. Ivan carved a beautiful wooden cradle, working on it by lamplight after his long days at the ranch. Sienna sewed tiny gowns and blankets, marveling at how small they seemed. They argued good-naturedly about names, finally agreeing that if it was a boy, they would name him Thomas after Ivan's grandfather, and if it was a girl, they would name her Margaret after Sienna's mother. In late March of 1879, after a long and difficult labor, Sienna gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Ivan was there for the whole thing, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, and when the midwife finally placed their son in his arms, Sienna saw tears streaming down her husband's face. "He is perfect," Ivan whispered, staring down at the tiny red face. "Thomas Jameson. Welcome to the world, son." The first months of parenthood were exhausting and overwhelming, but also filled with moments of pure joy. Sienna learned to nurse, to soothe a crying baby in the middle of the night, to function on very little sleep. Ivan proved to be a devoted father, coming home from work and immediately taking over baby care so Sienna could rest. He would walk the floor with Thomas when he was fussy, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice until the baby fell asleep on his shoulder. "You are good at this," Sienna told him one evening, watching him gently rock their son. "Being a father, it comes naturally to you." "I had no idea it would feel like this," Ivan admitted. "I knew I would love him, but I did not expect it to be so immediate and so fierce. I look at him and think about how I would do absolutely anything to keep him safe and happy." "I know exactly what you mean," Sienna said softly. "Sometimes I look at the two of you and I cannot believe this is my life, that I am this fortunate." As Thomas grew, he proved to be a happy, curious child with his father's dark eyes and his mother's determination. By his first birthday, he was walking and getting into everything, and Sienna found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the summer of 1880, she gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret. Life became even busier with two small children, but it was a good kind of busy. Ivan had been promoted to foreman at the ranch, which came with better pay and a larger house. Sienna had to give up most of her sewing work to care for the children, but she did not mind. She had spent years working for others out of obligation. Now she was working for her own family, out of love, and the difference was everything. When Thomas was 4 and Margaret was 2, Ivan came home one evening with news that made Sienna's heart race with excitement and fear. "The owner of the ranch is selling off parcels of land," he said. "Nothing huge, but enough for a small homestead. I have been saving every spare penny for years now, and I think we have enough for a down payment. We could own our own land, Sienna, build our own house. What do you think?" Sienna did not even have to consider it. "I think we should do it. I think it is time we put down real roots." They bought 40 acres on the edge of the ranch property, land that included a small creek and was good for grazing. Ivan worked every spare moment building them a proper house with 3 bedrooms and a real kitchen, and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. It took him nearly a year, working with help from friends he had made at the ranch, but when it was finally finished, it was the most beautiful thing Sienna had ever seen. They moved in on a warm spring day in 1882, and that night, after the children were asleep, Ivan and Sienna stood on their new porch and looked out over their land. "You remember the night we met?" Ivan asked, his arm around her waist. "When I found you burying those silver spoons." "Of course I remember," Sienna said. "I was so frightened. I thought my whole world was falling apart." "Instead, it was falling together," Ivan said. "Because if you had not been burying those spoons, if I had not decided to investigate that noise, if I had not offered to help you, none of this would exist. We would not be standing here on our own land, with our children sleeping in our house, planning our future." Sienna turned to face him, reaching up to touch his face. "I think about that sometimes. How many little moments had to align perfectly for us to find each other. It feels like fate." "Maybe it was," Ivan said. "Or maybe we made our own fate by being brave enough to take a chance on each other." Over the years that followed, their homestead grew and prospered. Ivan raised horses, developing a reputation for training animals that were gentle and reliable. Sienna started a small business selling preserves and baked goods in town, her jams becoming particularly popular. They had 2 more children, another son they named William and a daughter they named Rose, and their house was always full of noise and laughter. Thomas grew up to be a serious, studious boy who loved books as much as his father did. Margaret was spirited and adventurous, always coming home with scraped knees and wild stories. William was gentle and had a gift with animals, able to calm even the most skittish horse. And Rose, the baby, was pure sunshine, always singing and dancing and making everyone around her smile. There were hard times, of course. A drought one year that nearly ruined them, an illness that swept through the family, leaving everyone weak for weeks. The constant worry about money and weather and all the thousand things that could go wrong when you were trying to make a living from the land. But they faced everything together, Ivan and Sienna, and their love only grew stronger with each challenge they overcame. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ivan presented Sienna with a gift, a delicate silver locket, the very one she had hidden near the creek back in San Antonio. "I kept it," he explained as she stared at it in shock. "When we sold all your things in El Paso, I held this one back. I always meant to give it to you, and I figured 10 years was long enough to wait." Sienna opened the locket with shaking hands and found 2 tiny portraits inside, one of her parents and one of Ivan and herself on their wedding day. She had no memory of having such a picture taken, and she looked at him in confusion. "I commissioned it," Ivan said, looking sheepish. "After we were married, I wanted you to have something to remember all of us by, your old family and your new one." Sienna could not speak through her tears. She just threw her arms around her husband and held him tight, this man who had saved her and loved her and built a beautiful life with her. "Thank you," she finally managed to whisper, "for everything, for seeing me that night, for helping me, for choosing me." "You chose me too," Ivan reminded her, "and I would make the same choice every single day for the rest of my life." As the years continued to pass, the Jameson homestead became a well-known and respected part of the community. Ivan was elected to the local school board, using his position to advocate for better education for all children, regardless of their parents' means. Sienna became known for her charitable work, often bringing food and assistance to families struggling through hard times, remembering all too well what it felt like to be trapped and desperate. Their children grew and thrived. Thomas went to university, the first in their family to do so, and became a teacher. Margaret married a kind young rancher and settled nearby. William took over the horse training business, expanding it beyond what even Ivan had dreamed. And Rose, their baby, shocked everyone by announcing her intention to become a doctor, and she had the determination and intelligence to make it happen. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Ivan and Sienna hosted a large party at their homestead. Friends and family came from miles around to celebrate with them, filling the house and yard with joy and laughter. Their grandchildren ran wild, chasing each other and playing games, and Sienna watched them with a heart so full it felt like it might overflow. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Ivan took her hand and led her away from the crowd, back to the barn where he kept his tools and tack. Behind the barn, barely visible in the fading light, was a small wooden marker. "You know what this is?" Ivan asked. Sienna looked more closely and realized with a shock that it marked the spot where she had buried those silver spoons all those years ago, back in San Antonio. "Why did you put a marker here?" "Because this is where our life began," Ivan said simply. "This is the spot where a desperate young woman was brave enough to plan her escape, and where a drifting cowboy decided to stop drifting and start living. I wanted to mark it, to remember it, to honor the courage it took to get from there to here." Sienna looked at the marker, then at their house glowing with lamplight, full of people they loved. She thought about the long journey from that terrified girl burying spoons in the dark to the woman she was now. Wife, mother, grandmother, business owner, pillar of her community. She thought about all the joy and sorrow, the triumphs and struggles, the ordinary, extraordinary moments that had made up the past 25 years. "We have had a good life," she said softly. We have, Ivan agreed, and we are not done yet. I plan to love you for at least another 25 years, Mrs. Jameson, probably more. Sienna turned to him, this man who had been her savior and her partner and her great love. His hair was more gray now than dark, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting in the sun, but to her, he was just as handsome as he had been the night they met. I love you, Ivan Jameson, she said. Thank you for finding me that night. Thank you for helping me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for letting me, Ivan replied, and he kissed her there behind the barn in the place where their story had begun, as the stars came out overhead and the sound of their family's laughter drifted on the evening breeze. They stood there for a long while, holding each other and remembering, grateful for every twist of fate and choice and chance that had brought them to this moment. And when they finally walked back to join their family, hand in hand as they had been for 25 years, Sienna knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single thing about the life they had built together. It had all been worth it, the fear, the risk, the leap of faith into the unknown, because it had led her here to this man, to this family, to this beautiful, precious, perfectly imperfect life. As the years continued to unfold, Ivan and Sienna grew old together on their homestead, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. They never forgot where they came from or the courage it had taken to escape and build something new. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, they would walk out behind the barn to that small marker and remember the night a cowboy found a woman burying silver spoons, and how that single moment had changed everything. They had taken a chance on each other when they had nothing, and they had built a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. It was more than either of them had ever dared to dream, and it was everything they had ever needed.